increase my faith. In the days and years following his kidnapping and enslavement, surely Solomon Northup must have murmured these words many times. Similarly, brothers and sisters, for you and me, when confronted with suffering and doubt, fear and confusion about how to respond to tragedy, the need for more faith makes a lot of sense. How inadequate our faith seems at such moments. Perhaps you saw the award-winning 2013 film 12 Years a Slave. In it, Solomon Northup is the main character, and we hear in this film the story of his slavery. In 1841, he was a free African American making a living as a violinist in Saratoga Springs, New York. He met two men, strangers to him, white men, who offered him work, and he badly needed it, and so he accompanied them to Washington, D.C., where he was drugged and later awoke in a slave pen. Sent to a Louisiana plantation, there he endured the brutal life of a slave for the next 12 years. He endured terrible beatings and witnessed even worse treatment inflicted on his fellow slaves. This horrendous testing of his faith must have prompted him on many occasions to beseech God to increase his faith, since it seemed so inadequate for the terrible challenge facing it. At last, as a result of finally being able to smuggle out a letter, the authorities arrived, verified his story, and he was a free man once again. The apostles in our gospel reading ask for an increase of faith in the wake of Jesus' challenging words to them that they were to forgive without limit. Perhaps in response to those words, they were thinking of all the trouble that Jesus' enemies, chief among them a number of the Pharisees, were causing him and them. And they realized that if they were going to forgive, they would need a huge dose of faith. It wouldn't be surprising if the prophet Habakkuk had found himself appealing to God for more faith. He wrote around the year 600 BC, a desperate time for the Israelites as they faced the prospect of conquest by the Babylonian army. Law and order were breaking down in society, and many scoundrels were using this unsettled time to their advantage to make a fortune off of others' misery. As we see in today's verses from this book, Habakkuk accuses God of ignoring the evil playing out in the Promised Land. Later in today's reading, which comes from the following chapter, the prophet proclaims that he has heard something from God, the assurance that God is fully aware of the people's plight and calls on them to trust in his faithfulness and in his ultimate victory. You know, ours is a time of fear, a time of insecurity. My brother-in-law has been without a job for more than 5 years, and plenty of other people are in the same boat. Some contend that our nation is in decline. Tension between people who are black and those who are white is very high in a number of places in our country. There is such fear of terrorism that a wide swath of our countrymen would bar all Muslims who come or who want to come to our country as refugees from lands torn apart by violence. They would bar them all, equating the Muslim faith with the evil of terrorism, painting all Muslims with the same broad brush. At this point in time, our response to God needs to be increase our faith. Our faith, my friends, can be so small, even tinier than a mustard seed, which is a very, very small seed. So easily we doubt God's love, and we even wonder whether God is at all interested, because it seems that evil is winning. We want God to resolve these problems, and by George, we want it right now. Just like Habakkuk 2,600 years ago. But the prophet came to understand that God's vision of peace and justice will be realized, though it seems delayed. The prophet was not able, could not possibly foresee that one day God's very Son, born into the world, would embody that vision and would establish it in the most astonishing of ways by dying on a cross and being raised. Through baptism, you and I have been immersed in that vision of peace and justice and commissioned to carry it out. Thanks to baptism, we have put on Christ, the very face of God, and our task is to share his love, his peace, and his mercy by welcoming refugees from Syria, by resisting racism, by defending the child in the womb and the child of God on death row, and working to better the lives of our sisters and brothers living on the margins of our society. Yes, our faith might seem too tiny when confronted with grave societal problems and personal suffering, as perhaps the prophet Habakkuk and Solomon Northup felt. And so, my friends, if that is the case, if our faith seems too tiny, let us trust in Jesus' assurance that our faith can accomplish wonders equal to the uprooting of a mulberry tree, which is quite large, and it's being planted in the sea. And may our faith keep us ever in mind that we can be absolutely certain of God's fidelity, which makes itself known every time we share in Eucharist, uniting us to Jesus' death and resurrection, the salvific deeds that conquered sin and death. This sacrament empowers us to carry on the battle against Satan until God's vision of peace and justice attains its fullness when the risen one comes again in glory.